Welcome to Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell. This is the place where we dive into the world of talent acquisition, explore the challenges of today's workplace, and discover what it takes to build a thriving and successful organization.
I'm back with workplace strategist Erica Keswin. We've been digging into her transformative books, Bring Your Human to Work, Rituals Roadmap, and her latest, The Retention Revolution, promises fresh insights into keeping employees connected in our evolving work landscape. Now, Erica, let's get into remote work. It's obviously becoming increasingly common. Recently, we've seen some people questioning it. And I have some thoughts on this, but what advice do you have for companies striving to maintain strong human connections in a distributed workforce?
So remote work's not going away. I think the biggest issue that we all need to grapple with, whether you are the CEO, a manager, or somebody entering the workforce, I think this is sort of the question. And so when I phrase it, we can look at it both top down and bottom up. The question is, how do we, I guess I'll say it from more of a leader perspective, right? How do we optimize for both this desire / AKA demand for flexible work and optimize for the human need and desire for connection? Because it's hard to optimize for both. We want both, but where there's a will, there's a way. And it goes back to where we started in this idea of intentionality. So I would say that's one thing, and I'll give you some ideas. Number two is, I'm not coming out and saying, here's the sweet spot on it. The magic number is 2.5 days or 3 days. So much of it depends on your business strategy. Where are people located, geographically? I had somebody that came up with this, human capital strategy around return to work and said, okay, September's coming. We're going to go back 3 days, but hadn't done enough research to say, wow, 30% of our people actually are COVID migrants and they've moved all over the country. And what ended up happening was the people that were coming in were pissed because they're like, well, I have to come in, but my 3 people on my team don't because they've moved. And then the people who did move felt left out and didn't feel connected because they weren't there. So it really was a lose-lose. So whatever you decide, it really needs to be based on, looking at geography. And a couple of companies are making this decision now to have people move back. So there's all these different ideas, and I'm fine with all of them. I think at this point we need to put a stake in the ground. We as leaders need to have an opinion. I urge people to approach it in 3 ways when they're rolling something new out, because the emotions are high, the stakes are high. It's a very, you see people walking around with their shoulders, in their ears, and it's stressful. So one, approach it if you're making a change through the lens of little bit of vulnerability. You know what, John, I get it. This is hard, but I'm feeling it too. Here's how this is impacting me, right, as a manager. Number 2, through the lens of empathy. I get that all of a sudden you're used to not commuting or, whatever it is. We've been in this, what Amy Cuddy calls the pandemic flux syndrome. 3 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. And it's really stressful for all of us. But the third is what I really want listeners to take away, which is approach it through the lens of experimentation. That, we're going to give this a shot and we're going to see how it works. And this might change too. And I think that takes some of the pressure off.
The angst, about it.
Some of the angst off. But I've seen a lot of different, and even calling it more sort of like flexible work. Some people are going to be fully remote, but I think, Nicholas Bloom at Stanford, who a lot of people follow, and he seems to be the guru these days, hybrid is here to stay. And that's what most people have. Only a very small percentage want full-time in person and full-time remote. So that, the 80% of what we're talking about here has some semblance of hybrid. So a few companies that have done some interesting things very recently, again, didn't make the book, but I'm so curious to see how they're going to play out. One is, and I'm sure you saw, there's a bunch of articles written about it, is Smucker's, the jelly company, that just announced maybe a month ago that they have 2 weeks a month that are connection weeks in the office. Only 1 in July and 1 in December. People might take Christmas break or July summer travel, but the rest of it is 2 weeks in the office. And they let you know well in advance what those weeks are. Of course, if you have a personal situation, a health thing, there's always especially now in this new world, they're from a human, bring your human perspective, any company, back in the day or now, there's always exceptions, but if 3 months in a row you don't show up, there's a problem kind of a thing. Now, what Smuckers does is they say, look, John, you can live anywhere. And you can live in Utah. You can, you want to be in a ski town, that's fine. We're based in Ohio. You just have to get yourself here and it's on your dime. And so it's giving people a sense of agency and ownership over that piece of it. And the feedback's been really positive. This past week, I met with some senior leaders. I was speaking at a conference and at Fidelity, and I didn't realize, but they just announced and they leaned into it. And I love that they approached it also through the lens of experimentation. And they said, we're doing this through, I forget, and they gave a date. This is what we're doing maybe through February of 25, or some number to say we're giving this a shot. And then we reserve the right to sort of check in again. But they're doing 1 week a month. And this is when you need to be here. And so, there's so many ways to address it. In the book, though, for anyone listening, the way to approach this, in addition to the vulnerability and empathy and experimentation, is to ace flexibility. We need to all think about flexibility through the lens of agency, autonomy. Everybody wants to have a little bit of autonomy, and every role is different, and some people can have more than others. But I would say really try to be creative, and you will be surprised. The jobs that you never thought could even have a little bit of work from home actually can. The second thing is designing for connection, examples of Fidelity and Microsoft, where I just was. And then the last is through the lens of equity, that we need to think about through the lens of how all people experience this.
So yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you've been saying. On the remote workforce. One of the things in terms of being hybrid that I found is so many people were thrust into it during the pandemic. It wasn't planfully done. It was like, we have to do this. We just did it. Whereas we were fortunate at the IPC in our organization. We've been remote for running hybrid for almost 8 years now. And so it was kind of like, oh, there's this pandemic, and so we're going to have to work from it. And everybody's like, yeah, so what? It's every day. That's what we do. And so a lot of, you hear about these companies saying, oh, like you were saying, you got to come back to work. You must be 100% back inside. The data, as you also alluded to, that I've seen shows, only 13% want to be 100% back in the office, but only 14% wanted to be 100% remote too. They want the hybrid. They need the mixture. And so again, I couldn't agree more with the flexibility. Figure out what works for the position, what works for your team. I love the idea that you shared about treat it as an experiment. We're going to try this and we'll see, we'll learn, because you constantly have to learn. Things are changing. There's there's various cultural mindsets. There's like the hierarchical culture or the marketplace culture, but there's this new kind of culture that's coming out that in terms of the adhocracy, which is ultimate flexibility. You need to be able to move and shift as your organization and your needs change. So I just see that as a way to look forward. So as a coach, you talk about, doing some of your, as you've consulted to different groups. As a coach, what are the most common challenges leaders face in fostering meaningful relationships within their teams, and how do you help them overcome these challenges?
Well, the leaders really need to model it. And if they're not modeling everything from, being present, showing up on those days, even wellness, everybody is stressed, they're burned out, and it's interesting, in the pandemic when everybody went home overnight and all the managers were like, how do I measure performance? I can't see anybody. The Microsoft, the Teams data, and I'm sure there's other surveys out there too, found people are working this what they call the third shift, right? They're working in the morning, they're working in the afternoon, and then they're back on at night. And then I heard some other statistic yesterday.
And that's not actually new for the pandemic. That's been historical for flex work all the time. It's one of the advantages that's always been cited, So anyway.
Yes, 100%. But especially now, these leaders need to model it and kind of go back to basics in that. That's one. I would also say one of the places where I would be investing right now, if I'm a leader, is there's a chapter in the book called Managers Are Having a Moment. And I know, over the pandemic, you heard the Googles and the Metas of the world, getting rid of all the middle managers and flattening the organization. But, these managers are on the front lines. And so when you come in and say, we're going from 3 days to 4 days, woohoo, and you know this is going to be really hard, your poor managers, they're like hung out to dry and they don't have the skills to manage it. They're stressed themselves. And so we've got to focus on, if we want all of this stuff to work, as a leader, you've got to really strengthen the muscle of that middle level, which I call the center. It's like the middle child. Though I have twins, so I don't really have a middle child, but these leaders can't do it alone. And so that would be a place where I would put some energy.
All right. So let me these next few questions, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of cultural and workplace values, things like that. So in your opinion, let's start with companies in general. How do companies strike a balance between pursuing profits and prioritizing the well-being of their employees?
I mean, I guess I don't see it as even a balance issue.
It was a trick question.
Okay, good. Because especially many of these companies have up to 5 generations of people working under one roof. And when we think about Gen Z, they're coming in with a vengeance. And in a positive way, they have completely destigmatized talking about mental health at work. It is there. They're going to pick a job or not pick a job if based on whether or not their wellness and is taken into consideration. To me, this is a non-negotiable, but wellness doesn't have to equate with, okay, I'm sitting home all day, doing nothing. We just have to figure out a way to integrate, these ideas. And, rituals are one way to do it. I have a chapter in the book on rituals around taking a break. Many people that are working from home now, they find themselves on, Zoom after Zoom after Zoom after Zoom. And that's pretty unhealthy. As we know, sitting is the new cancer. They're not moving their bodies. And so again, some of this is top down, some of this is bottom up, that we just get sucked in. And so I create these, rule meetings. I have chapters in all of my books on meetings. We need rules of the road. Can't finish on the hour. You got to build in time in between. I have a woman that shared, she has her own ritual called 20 by 20 by 20. Every 20 minutes, she takes a 20-second break from her computer. I love the Tony Schwartz's book on the Energy Project, that every 90 minutes, you got to really take a break to maximize your level of energy. So for everyone, it's an individual journey, but it's a non-negotiable, both from the top and the bottom.
When you prioritize the well-being of your employees, you're prioritizing your profits. I mean, it's equivalent. When people are feeling better and able to do better work, they actually do better work. So you're more successful. I just feel like like I said, I feel like it's a trick question.
Okay. I'm glad I got the answer right for your trick question.
Yeah, there's no right answer. But anyway, that's my opinion. That's all. So what role do empathy and emotional intelligence play in creating a workplace culture that values human connection?
Huge. I mean, when I was speaking earlier, I have this article that I'm working on that's called what is a recipe of a strong leader? If you were to, I don't really cook, but if I were to cook, a recipe, 1 part this, 2 parts that. In this moment, that is a critical ingredient in the recipe. And it goes back to, a little bit of, vulnerability, empathy. And when I talked about experimentation, the reason why it's even more important now was that during the pandemic, many leaders, quote unquote, brought their human to work, and in a way that they hadn't before. I lived downtown in New York City during 9/11. And when I think about the 2 events in my life where the country, the world came together, there are others, but 9/11 and the beginning of the pandemic. And what happened in the beginning of the pandemic was people were saying to their teams, to each other, how are you really, really doing? And they stopped and they listened, and they either actually cared or they faked it really well. And some people, this was came naturally to them. Others it didn't, but they knew in this moment to keep their companies going, like something in their brain must have told them that they needed to kind of bring their human to work in a different way. And again, some of it was by default. They had the dogs in the background, the kids home from school, the technology breaking down, I live in New York City, so people live with a lot of roommates and people opening the refrigerator. We were just human. And what I believe and what I often say is that I would never want to go back to March of 2020, April of 2020. Personally, it was a very stressful time. My mom passed away April 2020. It was probably one of the first Zoom funerals. And, these were the days of washing down the groceries. But while I wouldn't want to go back, I also don't want to fully forget what I saw and how we felt. And so the importance of, being a human professional and the importance of empathy in this moment, right? 3.5 years past. If you want to retain people, you need to bring some of that and the importance of checking in with your employees and really asking them, how are you really, really doing, in a way that doesn't take up 60 minutes of a 60-minute meeting. And I have a whole chapter on it in the book, but it's doable. I mean, you can check in 5 minutes. And so I urge people to bring a piece of that back in this moment.
As you were talking about the role of the middle manager, I think this is one of the key roles for them as well, is they're there to connect, and having that empathy and emotional intelligence, I really think is, you can't do it if you eliminate all the you need people to be close enough to connect.
Right. But here's something, but I fully agree, but here's one of the challenges. Many middle managers aren't given the time and the space to do it.
Sometimes the training too, they don't know how to do it.
Right. There's the training 100% for sure. But then there's the, oh my gosh, okay, so yesterday, it's the classic, I was a great salesperson. Now I'm a sales manager. I don't even know if I want to do this, but now I'm a manager, but I'm still doing my day job. And I had a great, I spoke a couple weeks ago at the Influence Greatness Conference, the OC Tanner Conference. And in the book, I interviewed CHRO. She's also the head of marketing, Mindy Cox. And Mindy shared a story where she said somebody came to her, it was a new manager. And she was like, the manager came to her and said, Mindy, I don't know what to do. I have all these people coming to me, asking me to fix this or deal with this. And the person was like, I don't know what to do. I don't have time. And she said, this is your job now. You are a manager and you need to move away from many of these pieces of your individual contributor role. Now, lucky for this person that, this person was given permission so somebody else could take on those pieces. But I think it's part structural and part training.
Yeah. So, couple more. You ready?
I could talk to you all day, John. I love your questions.
Work-life integration, topic of interest. How can individuals effectively navigate the blurred lines? You talked about it earlier about, always having to be on, they're connecting, now that we have a very hybrid or remote capabilities. How can individuals effectively navigate the blurred lines between work and personal life in today's world?
Yeah, I think it's company to company and it's manager to manager. And so it's, ideally leaders are modeling this and they're saying this matters. And what I would say is that if I'm more junior in a company, I would hold them to it. And, you kind of have to play around with, who, what, where, when, and why, and what you are doing. I do think where there's a will, there's a way. And it could be, starting your day off, with a certain amount of intention. What are your non-negotiables? There's Harry's Razors has something in there. They have a hybrid, a big PowerPoint that was sent out to everybody. I need to follow up and see what they're doing with this now, but it was called GT, Golden Time. So they urge people on their calendars that everybody can see to say, what is non-negotiable? Of course, if there's a client meeting or something that's mission critical, you're not going to do it on a Wednesday. But if on a Wednesday, you have a yoga class that is something that makes you just better, put it on your calendar for all to see, especially if you have a company that is telling you to do it. I urge you to actually do it. Ideally, the company means what they're saying. If they're not, they have much bigger issues, or maybe it's a managerial issue. But if they're saying, we are doing these things, I urge you to do it and get a sense of what that interaction was. If you're a manager, I really urge you to, if you know that everybody's feeling really burnt out, one of the things you can do to connect in one of your team meetings, say, okay, and a lot of companies do this. They'll say, okay, our every Wednesday at noon, this is our time to do something wellness oriented. And on Thursday at our meeting, I want everybody to tell me what they did. it could be an hour, it could be 20 minutes. But, when I talk about rituals and people for themselves, I say to people, what do you do in your life that makes you feel most like you? And that's sort of a good place to start if you have no idea where to start.
Very good. As we come to the close of our discussion, just a couple more questions here. Let's make it a little bit more personal. Can you describe a moment in your career where you faced a significant challenge or setback and how you overcame it?
After I wrote Bring Your Human to Work, one of the reasons why I wrote a book was I had been doing a lot of consulting, and I had, 3 kids within 2 years, twins and another one. And I wanted consulting. I wanted to try to shift to a job that enabled me to have a little more agency and control over my life. And I thought, if I write a book and be able to go and speak and, fly to wherever and share my thoughts and then go home, I can have a little bit more agency until the next time I do something. So I worked so hard to build that up, and I did it. And like many jobs that changed during the pandemic, overnight, everything went away, everything. And so thinking, all right, no one's getting on a plane. And at the time, interestingly, there wasn't even a thing, at least in my world, maybe for some other people, for companies to hire experts for virtual conversations. Like it just wasn't a thing, X amount of years ago. Again, maybe for some people, but I was not experiencing it. And so one of the things I started to do in the beginning I'm home during the pandemic was I just reached out and I started doing tons and tons of pro bono conversations and with groups of leadership, partly through the lens of being able to really help anyone and everyone I could in this moment. And I think approaching these kinds of things through the lens of not just what's in it for me, but how can I use my expertise to help, the world and the people with what they're going through right now, and hopefully good things will follow. And that's really what I did. And I ended up making some, building some great relationships. And, you had to change the mindset a little bit of people thinking, well, I don't understand, why do I need to pay you? You're not, you're home and you're not doing anything. And I'm like, well, it is, especially when you're giving a keynote, you're like, well, it is sort of, proprietary, it's still my work. So, so that's sort of been cool that now I can work in a very hybrid way. I still love getting on a plane and meeting people in real life. And wow, things are busy. And you just said you got back from Romania. The conference circuit is alive and well. People are loving having these in-person connections. But then you also, I did an event last week with a women's group within a company that had women all over the world. So it's, again, finding that sweet spot between tech and connect. But I really had to kind of go deep and take a leap of faith, and give back at the same time.
I love that you were able to see the challenge and then just go after it in just a different way. It's like, okay, that's not going to work anymore, but I still need to do my thing, which that's fantastic.
Yeah. And I do love it. I'm really lucky that what I do is a big part of who I am. And so
that's what makes it great.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's everybody's goal, and to try to find that.
Last question. Let's close out with a big one. And maybe this isn't so hard. Maybe it is hard. We'll see. If you had to distill your key message into one piece of advice for both leaders and employees.
I'm going to pick 2. One is honor relationships. And when you're at that fork in the road and you're not sure, I'm supposed to go in 3 days a week, and there's something on the 4th and I'm really don't want to go. Do you go? Well, who's there and why? What's the why? You're at that fork in the road. Do you take a left? Do you take a right? Hire this person, go to this meeting. Your values and your company values should drive you. And that will help you honor those relationships sort of from a 360 holistic kind of way. And it's honoring relationships, again, with yourself, with your mental health, with your friends, with your family, colleagues, kind of everybody above. So that's sort of one. And the second, I mentioned it, but again, we need to keep coming back to it, is finding that sweet spot between tech and connect. And they go hand in hand, but we need to leverage the technology, but also make sure that we put it in its place in order to have those deeper connections.
Wonderful. Erica, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you about workplace and all the many challenges and how we can overcome them as we go forward. Wish you the best of luck going forward, and congratulations on your new book release. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I loved it. Like I said, we could have talked all day.
Absolutely. And that wraps up this episode of Fire Your Hiring Habits. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to subscribe and receive notifications for new episodes. Also, if you could spare a minute, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review to help others like yourself discover the show. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.
This has been Fire Your Hiring Habits. If you want to empower your organization to reach new heights, go to johnwmitchell.com to find the techniques and tools you need to attract and retain the best team and boldly reimagine your workplace. Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell is a production of Forbes Books.